Well, tonight we are continuing in Hebrews chapter 11. We started this a while back in chapter 11, and we have now entered into that season of the year where you go from Easter to Mother's Day, you've got Memorial Day, you've got Father's Day, you've got 4th of July. There's all these things coming up. So now we've got Sunday night on, Sunday night off, Sunday night on, Sunday night off, 2 Sunday nights on, 1 Sunday night off. It's just we're kind of hit or miss. And so if you get confused, I understand, because I stay that way. And I want to kind of give you a recap, because it was before Mother's Day that we began chapter 11, looking at the examples by faith. We started off with the first 22 verses of chapter 11, and we'll try to get as far as we can tonight. I really don't think that we will finish the chapter 11 tonight, because there's just so much that so many notes that I was able to come up with. But I want us to at least get far enough through this so that we can finish it up the next time. But that being said, next Sunday evening is Memorial Day week, so we won't have Sunday evening next Sunday. So we'll have to finish it up in a couple of weeks. That's just one of those things. So I hope you take notes. And I hope you bring your notebook each week, so that way you can refresh your memory as to where we were and what we were doing. But this chapter is often called the Saints' Hall of Fame, or the Honor Roll of the Old Testament Saints, or the Heroes of Faith. I just titled it the Examples by Faith. These are great examples for us to follow. Let us go and look at the first 3 verses once again. I think that's a good kickoff. And shows us where we are and where we're going in this chapter, and looking at the faith from past and present. In verse 1 it says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, for by it the elders obtained a good testimony. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are invisible." And so here we just looked at that faith as described here involves the most solid possible conviction, and that true faith is not based on observed evidence, that faith is trust in godly things. Those godly individuals who have gone on before us lived lives that testified of Jesus and were examples of faith, and that we believe that God spoke the universe into existence and He is the Creator. That's a good summary of those first 3 verses. But then from there, we moved into verse 4 and following, and we looked at the faith that's found in the book of Genesis. So we looked at Abel and Enoch, Noah, then Abraham, Sarah. Then you move into the patriarchs. And then it goes back to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And that's where we got to last time, looking at these individuals who were heroes and examples for us to look at, to learn from, and to pay attention to. So, as we get to verse 23, we move from the faith found in Genesis to now faith that's in Exodus. Faith that's found in Exodus. The verses 23 through 29, if you were to go back and look in Exodus, this would be in chapters 1 through 15. That's what the author of Hebrews is focusing in on by looking at Moses. Well, he begins by looking at Moses' parents, the parents' faith. Look at verse 23. It says, "By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents, because they saw that he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's command." 3 months of hiding a newborn baby. How did they do that? I've often wondered that, and especially when I watch a video, a movie, or whatever, and they try to explain this. I just know as a parent, that's got to be an impossible task to try to conceal or hide a newborn baby. I mean, what do babies do? They cry. But not only that, but they got stinky diapers. You can't hide that. How do they keep the officials from coming in to examine this child to see whether it was a boy or a girl? That's hard evidence to hide right there. But they were able to do so. And they did so because of their faith. God told them to do so. It says there that because he was a beautiful child. Well, that's not talking about the fact that he was more beautiful than other children. It's not talking about the physical appearance of Moses. It just means that he was highly favored, that God had selected him. He was favored and not necessarily attractive as in his looks, but attractive to God, and God was going to use Moses to do great things. And so therefore God protected this baby. Moses' parents had faith to trust in God, knowing that it could cost them their lives. There are still those in this world today that have that kind of faith. I hope you and I do as well. We're just not put up to the test like that. We are living in a free country where we can worship. There are others around this world that they have to worship in hiding, or their faith has to be concealed, because if the government found out, or if the gangs found out, kind of like the missionary over in South Africa who was kidnapped. If y'all remember the story just a few weeks ago, he was a missionary from East Tennessee. He came from a church not far from a church where I pastored. I pastored a church in Maryville, Tennessee, and his church was probably less than 5 miles away from there. That was his home church, and they sent him out as a missionary to South Africa, and some gangs there kidnapped him and held him captive for several days until the officials came in and were able to take out the kidnappers and rescue him. But his life was in jeopardy. Well, that would also mean that other Christians there, their lives are in jeopardy. And there are people like that around the world where it could cost them their lives if they followed because of their faith. And so we just need to pray for them. But then you need to ask yourself that same question. If that were me, if it became illegal to be a Christian in America, or if it became hazardous to my health to live here and be a Christian, would I still live the same way? Would I kick it up a notch, or would I cower down and hide in my basement? Those are the kind of questions that you can ask yourself as to how would your faith be seen if it became treacherous or hazardous to your health if others knew that you were a Christian. Well, that was his parents' faith. There's also looking at the future. Verse 24 through 26 talk about his future, and it says, by faith Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. Moses had it all. Moses had everything by living in Pharaoh's palace. But not only did he have it all, he could keep it all. It was rightfully his as an adopted son, and in this case, grandson to Pharaoh. He chose to follow God's plan over man's desires. It had been really easy for him just to sit back and say, I've got it really perfect here in the king's palace. And Pharaoh has given me all that I could ever want or have. And I've been adopted into this family. And he could have easily capitalized on his position and use it to his advantage for the rest of his life. But he would rather suffer with his people than to live lavishly in the palace of Pharaoh. Not because of his own desires. I'm sure he had fleshly desires, just like any one of us. But because God was calling him. And when God calls, you will be miserable if you don't obey. When we go our own way and do what we think is best for us, and it's not what God's plan is, we're miserable. And so the story of Moses gives us a glimpse of Christ, who left his throne in heaven to come to redeem us from our sins. And so Moses forsook earthly consequences in verses 27 and 28. It says, by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. Now, Moses fled from Egypt twice. The first time he fled from Egypt, he actually did flee from Pharaoh because he had murdered an Egyptian who was a slave master. And because of that, he was now on the run, and he had to flee. The second time that he left Egypt, he was focused on pleasing God, and he did not fear Pharaoh. Now, he knew that Pharaoh could still kill him, but he wasn't afraid of that. He just continued to keep his eyes on God, knowing that God would take care of him. And so that's where his faith was. And because his faith was in someone that he could not see, he knew God intimately. And in fact, his faith made the invisible visible. Now think about that for a moment. Moses trusted in someone that he had not seen, had not heard, until he left and went to a place of refuge, I guess you want to call it that. And when did he first hear God's voice? The burning bush. And God told him to remove his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. And God then gives him this plan, is to go and to rescue the Israelites and to bring them out of bondage and out of Egypt and bring them into the promised land. And that's when he first heard the voice of God. And then later, when they are wandering in the wilderness, he speaks intimately with God. He hears God's voice, and God reveals himself to him both spiritually, but then also physically. Moses got to see God. And what happened after he saw God and came back down off of the mountain, they had to put a veil over him because the glow from him was blinding to other people. And it was actually scary to look upon him because he had seen God. So his faith in the invisible became visible, both spiritually in his heart, but even with his own eyes. Our faith will one day become sight. We will behold God. We will see him. Not on this side of heaven unless we see him coming in the clouds, but when we get to heaven, we will be in his presence and we will see him forevermore. We read here in these verses, in verse 28, that Moses established the Passover. Yes, Moses himself kept the Passover, and he commanded the people of Israel to keep the Passover for two reasons. One, because they would keep their focus and to remember what God had done for them in the past. But also, it would point them to the coming Messiah who would rescue them from their sins. So it had a twofold purpose to keep the Passover. What God has done in the past and what God is going to do in the future. He rescued them from Egypt and bondage. He's going to bring the Messiah who's coming to redeem and rescue them from their sins. And then in verse 29, we see that he walked by faith. Verse 29 says, "By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians attempted to do so, were drowned." So here they are, standing on the shores of the Red Sea, and the Israelites thought that they were going to either die by the sword or drown in the sea. Those are the only two options. I mean, we are not just between a rock and a hard place. We're between death and death. Death by the Egyptians who are going to come through and just maul us, or death by drowning in the sea. But Moses urged them to walk through faith, to go on into the water. God is going to deliver us, and that's exactly what he did. So Moses was their preacher who was persuading them to keep their eyes on Jesus when common sense said not to. Common sense said, hey, just give up, drop to your knees and lift up your hands and surrender to Pharaoh's army. That's what common sense would tell any one of us to do. But walking by faith sometimes goes against what common sense says, and to trust in God. And by doing so, God demonstrated his mighty hand not only by delivering his people across the sea unharmed and unwet, but he destroyed the army of Pharaoh. I don't know if anybody has ever listened to Kent Hovind. He's a creation scientist. Anybody ever heard of Kent Hovind? You got to look him up sometime. He's interesting. All right, Tina, you've heard of him. Kent Hovind is a creation scientist. I wouldn't say he's perfect by any means. He's made his fair share of mistakes. I think he went to jail for not paying taxes because he said Christians shouldn't have to pay their taxes, and so he had to pay the consequences for that. But as far as being a a scientist who stands on creation. He is every bit as good as Ken Ham, and he's entertaining and kind of comical, and you would really, really enjoy listening to him. But he has one of his segments talks about there's a portion of the Red Sea, not the Reed Sea. He points out that it's not the Reed Sea as liberal scholars might try to say. It's the Red Sea. There's a place that's a perfect place for the crossing of the Israelites, and they have found wagon wheel or chariot wheels at the bottom of the Red Sea that match the same time period as to when Israel would have escaped Egypt. And he says it's got to be that. It's got to be this account right here. That why else would there be chariot wheels, the round spoked wheels that would fit perfectly on a chariot? Why else would they be in the bottom of the Red Sea, right here with the perfect place for the crossing? God delivered his people. He protected them, and he destroyed the army of Pharaoh. Well, that's faith found in Exodus. You move on to the next phase of history, and that is the book of Joshua. There's faith found in Joshua, and that's verses 30 and 31. If you were to go back and look at this text, it's found in Joshua chapter 6. These two verses look at Joshua 6. First of all, it's Joshua and the nation of Israel. It says, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. Now, just like the people of Israel did nothing to escape Pharaoh, God is the one who parted the Red Sea. And God's people didn't do anything to stop up the Jordan River. God is the one who stopped it up, and the people walked across the Jordan River. Now, God is going to cause the walls of Jericho to fall. The mighty men of Israel, the warriors, did nothing. All they did was march. Now, I know our soldiers here in this room, you probably did a lot of marching in your day, and it's preparation, but the marching is not the actual battle. The marching is what your drill sergeant makes you do, and you got to march from A to B. Well, that's what the Israelites were doing. They were marching around the city. God is the one who brought the walls down. So the Israelites, they marched, and they had faith to do so. Can you imagine? Common sense would have said, Joshua, what are we doing here? Why are we just walking in circles? Why are we walking around the city? The people inside are laughing at us. It takes faith to do what this world scoffs at and to do what just doesn't make sense. And so they followed, they obeyed because of faith. Verse 31, we see Rahab and her faith. By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. Isn't it just amazing how God often chooses the unlikely people? He made a harlot a hero. And why is that? That's because she believed in a God that was not her own until she saw who he was and placed her faith in him. And the God of Israel became the God of Rahab and her family. And so faith is what prompted that persuasion. Look at the next phase of history. That's the faith found in Judges. Verse 32 says, and what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah. Let's look at the characters that are listed here in the book of Judges. I remember going back to my childhood. Two of my favorite books of the Bible as a child were Joshua and Judges. I guess as a kid, I loved history and I loved war stories. Well, man, Joshua and Judges has got war stories, and it's a books of history. And so I really always enjoyed them. And when I read them now, I guess having a little bit more insight or understanding, I look back and look at these characters found in especially Judges. I'm thinking, God, why didn't you just wipe them out all? I mean, it's not just the people who lived on a roller coaster. They walked with God, then they went away from God, and then they turned back to God, they walked with Him, and then they went away. But even the leaders, there were very few leaders that He called judges that I would say were good role models. And again, using the example of Rahab, who was a harlot that God transformed into a hero, He does the same thing with these characters. He lists 4 of them: Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah. Gideon, found in Judges chapter 6 through 8, was a leader with flaws. Barak was a military commander who hid behind a woman we know as Deborah, and that's found in Judges chapters 4 and 5. Samson was a self-centered dork, for lack of better terms. And he was nerdy and couldn't do anything for himself. He had to, and I could go on and on about Samson, and that's found in Judges 13 through 16. And then there's Jephthah. Jephthah was unloved by anybody. He was unwanted by his family, and he made many mistakes. And that's in Judges 11 and 12. And if you notice here, the names are out of order. There's 4 names listed. They're not in chronological order. So I wondered why that was. And I went and tried to look that up. And I read a variety of different answers, and none of them really satisfied my curiosity. So I don't know. I can't tell you why they're listed out of order. One person said it's listed by popularity or fame or importance. Gideon, what he did was far more valuable and more recognizable than what Jephthah did. You might even know who Jephthah was. You have to go back and reread that. And if you do, then it's found in Judges 11 and 12. I encourage you to do so here tonight. But all of these held positions of power, but really none of them can be praised for their personal lives. And instead, these were very flawed men. But in spite of that, they still had faith. They had faith in God, and that God would use them to do things that were beyond their abilities. And He used them to do incredible things. If we go on now, we'll just have to finish, and we don't have time to finish. So why don't we just put a pin in it right here? Because this is our good stopping place. Because then we get into David and Samuel. We look at the kings and the prophets. And so let's stop right here. But so far, as we looked at the characters from Genesis, and God used all those individuals as examples. He used Moses in the book of Exodus as an example, and the Israelites as He delivered them. He used Joshua and Rahab from the book of Joshua as examples of faith. We look at these judges, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, great examples. They've got their flaws. Just as I'm looking out here tonight on people who've got flaws, because I know that because when I look in the mirror, I see a man with flaws. There's no one perfect, and that's why we put our faith in someone who is perfect, and that's Jesus Christ. They were doing so looking forward to the coming Messiah. We can do so looking back. We had a conversation just this afternoon either on our way to lunch or our way home from lunch. I can't remember. But if you look at history, and we know that Jesus probably was not born in the year 0 or 1, because there is no 0. He probably wasn't born in the first year. That there was some error in the calculations of the dating. More than likely, he was born in probably 3 to 5 years BC. What that means is we are rapidly approaching in the next, just very, very soon, 2,000 years since Christ went to the cross. That's something to behold. Kind of amazing. 2,000 years ago, Christ went to the cross for you. Is your faith in Him? Is your faith in a man that died 2,000 years ago for you? Because I guarantee you, I know it. I know without a shadow of a doubt that when he was hanging on that cross, he had your name on his mind. He was thinking of you. He knew that he was not just doing this for mankind. He was doing this for you. He desires to have a relationship with you. He longs for that now. He wants that relationship to grow. And so by faith, we trust in him to walk when common sense tells us not to, when fear tells us not to, when your own desires tell you not to. As a man or woman of God, we walk by faith. So place your faith, your hope, your trust in him. So tonight, as it comes this time of invitation, before we can go on and look at the remaining verses, because it takes another 45 minutes to get through the rest of it, realize that these examples are there for you. If you were here this morning, probably majority of you were here this morning. I mentioned Josie and how she had said at youth camp last year, "Follow Jesus, not me." And I told her at camp, I said, you know what? Great, great, great message for us to live by. But as the Apostle Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. I said, Josie, you are a Paul. You are imitating Christ. You are a living example that we can see with our own eyes, that we can follow. And so, yes, while she's putting the attention to Christ, we can follow an example. Well, I hope that the same thing can be said for each one of you, that I can imitate you because you're imitating Christ. That needs to be your testimony, that others can say, I want to be like Caleb. I want to be like John. I want to be like Dylan. I want to be like Bonnie. I want to be like someone who's given me an example of what a Christ follower is. And if you're sitting here saying, ooh, I'm glad he didn't call my name, then this is a time for you to surrender that to him, to say, I want to be a living example. If he were to rewrite a Hebrews 11 and to use examples today, I want my name to be in there. And if you can't say your name would be in there, then tonight, turn that around so that you can be a living example pointing others to Jesus. As we have our time of invitation tonight, as God is speaking to you, you just listen to him and you obey.